Daphne, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
Well, how does a massive open online course, or a MOOC as it is called, like those taught through Coursera, differ from the traditional educational experience? And what are the pros and cons?
So if by the traditional education experience you mean the face-to-face teaching, I think that there are differences that vary based on what audience you're talking about. So these MOOCs, as they're called, have been offered separately both to the general public at large, but also as a way of transforming the educational experience of on-campus students. So in terms of the students and the general public, there is this tremendous opportunity for them to be exposed to the kind of knowledge that has until now only been available to a tiny sliver of the world's population. And they don't get the same experience necessarily as the on-campus students because they don't get that one-on-one connection with the instructor. But on the other hand, the availability of the content is just a tremendously enabling experience for those students, and there's still a hugely interactive experience in terms of interaction with the material, which is not just video. There's also a lot of exercises and assessments, as well as this rich community that is based on around the material, where students interact with each other in a kind of peer teaching format. At the same time, students on campus can benefit from that same content and have the experience of going and watching the content separately outside the classroom and then coming into class and having a lot more time for an active learning, interactive experience with their instructor.
Let's just take a step back. How would Coursera fit into the higher education landscape? Does a MOOC supplement traditional learning as you just described, or do you see it as a substitute as well?
I think it depends on the population again. For those students who are privileged enough to be enrolled in an academic institution such as Wharton or Princeton or Stanford, there is a tremendous opportunity to supplement the standard instruction and then again, repurpose the classroom time for a much more meaningful and interactive experience. For a lot of students out there, however, they will never have access to this quality of education. And so you can view this as a substitute for the education that they would have liked to have. For many students that are taking our courses, they are in fact already educated professionals. They have a degree, sometimes they have even an advanced degree, but they would like to expand their minds and learn new things. And they will never go back to school, whether for financial or geographical constraints, and this is a tremendous opportunity for them to learn something.
Great. So now I understand that do 33 institutions offer MOOCs through Coursera?
That's right.
And how many students have they served?
So currently enrolled on the platform, we have over 1.5 million students that are currently enrolled in. There's 5 million distinct course enrollments because students often enroll for more than one class. A lot of these students have not yet been served because a lot of our close to 200 classes have not yet started to run, and so I think we've served hundreds of thousands of students so far, but not the full 1.5 million that have been enrolled.
And what have you learned so far about participation, completion, and dropout rates of this online population?
So one of the things that we see is that, because enrolling is so easy, it's a matter of just clicking a button and it's free. A lot of students do that. And then when it comes time for the course to actually begin, about 70% of them show up because maybe their life has moved on and they're now busy doing something else. Of the ones that show up, we see a bifurcation of the population. There are students who come in and they really are there primarily to just get the benefit of the content. They're just there to watch videos. And of those who start watching videos, about 30 to 40% continue watching the entire rest of the course to its completion, with a sort of fairly constant drop-off rate week on week as students get busy and their life imposes some challenges on them. Similarly, there is the second population, those students who really do intend to take the course for real, and we kind of gauge that right now by seeing who submits the first assignment as an indicator that if you submit the first assignment, you maybe really do intend to take the class for real. And again, the retention rate for that population is comparable. It's about 30% of the people who start the first assignment complete the last one. Now, in terms of sort of overall what you might traditionally call retention, that is the number of students who submit the last assignment relative to the population who initially enrolled for the course, that translates into a completion of 7% or so, 9%, depends on the course. But that's really the wrong way of looking at it, because many of these students never really intended to take the class in the first place.
Right.
Not for real.
Right. So, for example, I understand that the gamification course that was offered through Wharton had about 70,000 people who enrolled initially, but about 9,000 completed it. Now that's quite a big gap.
Right.
What have you learned about the different kinds of courses where you've seen greater success than others?
I don't view 9,000 out of 70,000 to be a bad statistic.
I didn't say so.
Yeah.
It was just a description, not a criticism.
I think we're still starting. I mean, we don't have a sufficiently large sample size right now to gauge what makes for success and what doesn't. And in fact, one of the things that we've started to do is research that is intended specifically to try and determine what increases retention, what increases engagement. So we're now running a test in which students are getting encouraging emails once a week saying, oh, you did so well in the last couple of assignments and the next one is due tomorrow. Don't you think it's good if you log in and try and complete the next one? You don't want to break your streak. And we're doing an A/B test in the same way that Google does A/B tests in search quality to see whether that actually increases student engagement. And one of the really beautiful things about having such a large base of population that you can run these experiments and get statistically significant results so that we can learn how to improve the learning experience for our students.
Now, some of the institutions that offer these courses offer credit and some don't. Why is that difference exist?
As of now, only one institution offers credit. That's the University of Washington, and they're offering it for an enhanced version of the course where students have interaction with the instructor and some additional homework besides what's available on the Coursera platform. I think that the granting of credit is a very sensitive issue for institutions, and they need to think carefully about what makes a credit-bearing class and what doesn't. And this is such a new area, and this whole transformational change that we're seeing is so new. I mean, a year ago today, approximately, September or October of 2011 was when the first real MOOCs launched. And so much has happened since that we are still, I think, all of us as a community are just trying to assimilate the change and figure out where we want to take this. And I think over the course of time, more and more institutions will move into the credit arena with this, but it's too early, I think, to have that step taken.
And do any institutions offer certification also?
So most of the institutions that we're working with have agreed to offer some kind of unofficial certification. As I mentioned earlier, most of our population, right now at least, are people who already have a degree and will never go back to school to get another one. And so for them, the question of whether the course carries credit is really of less relevant compared to whether they have a meaningful certificate that they can, for example, present to an employer to demonstrate competence in a particular topic. And so I'm very pleased that most of the institutions have decided to offer that benefit to students, which allows them to really gain something substantial for the work that they did.
And is it Coursera that offers the certification or the institution, and is there any charge for it?
So what we have been able to offer up to now is what is often called a statement of accomplishment or something along those lines. And it is an unofficial letter from the instructor with the instructor's signature that does not carry any kind of university authorization. In the coming months, we plan to be able to offer for some of the courses, and not from all institutions, basically university branded certificate that would carry the university brand, and it would say that this is an online non-credit bearing course so that to distinguish from the courses that the university offers its own enrolled students. And so it will be a university brand certificate. It'll also carry the Coursera brand somewhere, but in a clearly different role because the two roles are different. We do not produce the content. We do not determine academic standards. When we begin to offer those, then yes, we believe there will be a charge for something that has, I think, such a substantial value to the students. But it won't be a huge charge.
So when you have certification, the question of assessment becomes very critical.
Mm-hmm.
Now, given the large volumes we have in these MOOCs, right. I would imagine that would be quite a challenge. How have you dealt with that?
So the question of assessment is one to which we have devoted extensive attention in our work because we, not even primarily for the purpose of certification at the end, but because we believe that exercises for which one gets meaningful feedback, the so-called formative assessments, are a really critical part of the learning experience for the students. If you don't get feedback on how well you're doing, you really either don't do the work or you don't learn the material well because you don't know that you're not getting it. And so we've developed a fairly extensive set of exercises that can be graded automatically by the computer. And that ranges from the fairly mundane multiple choice or fill in the blank or numerical answers to some fairly in-depth assessments like grading of programming assignments, of Excel spreadsheets, for example, for marketing or financial models, grading of mathematical expressions. And most recently, one of our biggest efforts, which we started to put out in the spring and has since gone out in, I think, 9 classes or maybe even more, is the whole notion of peer grading, where students critically assess each other's work, providing both a quantitative grade as well as qualitative feedback. And by combining ideas from the kind of peer review process that has been used in the education community with the crowdsourcing ideas that have been used in websites like Wikipedia, where wisdom of the crowds is used to sort of compensate for lack of expertise among the people doing the work, we believe that we can actually put together something that provides students with meaningful feedback for the kind of open-ended work that is so critical, for example, in humanities and in business and in other disciplines.
Yeah, I mean, I can certainly understand that peer-reviewed assessments help to address the scale question.
Right.
But isn't the absence of feedback from a qualified instructor a limitation?
So I think that clearly the answer is that in certain disciplines, in certain contexts, it is a limitation. So, for example, I would not use peer review to grade 10,000-word essays where an instructor would be able to provide a real in-depth assessment of the quality of the work and give the kind of substantial feedback that only an expert can give. So I think it comes back to an important component of this that we, I think, discussed a little bit earlier, which is that this is not going to be an experience that is comparable to the experience that a student who attends an institution like the University of Pennsylvania in person gets. So there's going to be differences. And the question that we should ask ourselves isn't whether we are going to achieve equality between the students at the University of Pennsylvania and the students out in the general public, but whether by the use of technology we have improved the quality of the experience for each of them separately. So both of them are better than they were before, even if they're still not quite the same.
Well, that's very interesting. And well, you said before that a lot of the people who take these courses are already professionals who have degrees, and that's fine. But there may be some young people as well who are trying to become professionals.
Right.
How do you address issues in the case of such populations about things like verifying the student's identity or plagiarism? How have you dealt with those things?
So first of all, to speak to just the assumption behind your question, I do think that as the mix of courses that we're offering changes to include more and more of these introductory or gateway classes, we're seeing an increase in the population of 18 to 25-year-olds and often even younger students from high schools who would like to, as you said, become professionals and get their degree. And so I think that's a really exciting direction because it is an important segment of the population to which you want to offer high-quality education. I think that there are a range of technological solutions that one can adopt in order to address issues of plagiarism detection and identity verification and reducing the amount of cheating. Keeping in mind, of course, that you will never be able to stop this entirely, and we have heard recently and in the past of incidents of cheating and plagiarism on our own college campuses, including at the highest ranked institutions. We have seen incidents of cheating at the SAT exams, which are supposedly the most proctored environment that one could have. So it's always going to be an arms race, and you're going to prevent some forms of cheating, and others will emerge to replace them. So one has to keep one's expectations realistic. I do think, and there's been a bunch of discussion about cheating in online courses on the web. I think that to some extent those have been a little bit overinflated relative to the actual amount that takes place. So, for example, in the Princeton sociology class, the TAs graded every single one of the 2,500 or so midterms. They estimate the proportion of plagiarism at about 5%. Now, even if that's an underestimate because they didn't actually plug this through a plagiarism detector, so maybe it's double that, 10%. Is that really that much higher than what we see in our on-campus classes? Not clear to me.
I'd love to switch to some questions about the business model,
Sure.
if you don't mind.
No?
Now, Coursera is not the only MOOC initiative. I wonder how you compare your approach to that of edX or Udacity.
So let me start from the Udacity comparison, because I think that's a fairly easy comparison. We are a technology platform that enables the best institutions to offer their education to the rest of the world. And we're not intending to become an educational institution in our own rights. We do not produce our own content. We rely on the content experts, which are some of the world's best instructors, to provide the content and set the academic standards. And we do that by partnering with the institutions so that faculty can basically teach under the brand of their institution, with the support of their institution. And I think we get some really amazing material by having that relationship with some of the world's best universities. So that's one comparison. The edX initiative, in some respects, is more similar to what we're doing because it's also an institutional level effort. In this case, it's a consortium of two of the world's outstanding institutions, most recently joined by a third, and I think that it's wonderful for students around the world to have access to content from those universities as well. We personally are very fond of this sort of notion of a broad consortium of peer institutions, because not only do we think that it provides economies of scale, because a single platform that is a fairly expensive and complicated thing to develop is now, the cost of that is amortized over a much larger set of courses and institutions. We also see tremendous benefit to the hub of having, a single place where people come for a very large amount of content. We have almost 200 courses right now and more coming up. And that's why we have 1.5 million students and rising, is because of that hub, in the same way that, Amazon is a hub or iTunes is a hub. And then finally, I think an advantage that maybe not quite as apparent from the outside, but you can clearly see it from the inside, is having this collaboration across institutions allows institutions to learn a tremendous amount from each other, because this is a completely new paradigm in teaching. This is not standard instruction sort of videotaped and placed online, as used to be the case. This is a real shift in how we teach, and we're all kind of learning together. And by having a bunch of peer institutions that are all communicating with each other and learning, I think we're going to develop good pedagogy and good ways of exploiting this new paradigm, this new medium, much, much faster.
Since Knowledge at Wharton has been giving away free content and free knowledge for the past 14 years, this is a question that is very dear to my heart. There is clearly a cost to producing the content. How do you plan to monetize your service? Presumably your investors are also interested in that.
Yeah, let me say that there's not only a cost to producing the content, there's also a cost to hosting and disseminating the content. There's also a cost to developing the platform that does all that. So yes, there's costs all around, and one of the decisions that we made was that, recognizing these costs and recognizing that they are ongoing, we realized that we couldn't count on some miraculous influx of funds from philanthropic foundations to keep us going indefinitely, which is is why we decided we had to make it sustainable. And so we have several ideas on revenue models, all of which at this point remain to be tested because we're very, very new to this. But one of them is one we touched on earlier, which is the potential to charge for certification. So even though we're committed to keeping the content free so that even a kid in Africa that doesn't have a credit card can still learn something to make their life better, if you get a certificate at the end that allows you to go and apply for a job and gives you some kind of tangible benefit, then that, I think, is a reasonable thing to charge for. We think that we can get employers to put in money into the effort by getting access to the records of students who have taken some of our courses, only those who have opted in, of course. And because there's some really amazing things about our student base. First of all, not only are they often educated, they're ones who have demonstrated the interest in continuing their education. So they're self-selected for some really good properties. Furthermore, employers would get much more quantitative and detailed information about those students than just their resume, which is what they say about themselves, but rather did they actually do well, both in hard skills, like on the exercises, but also on soft skills, like in helping each other on the discussion forum and in study groups. And so that's a really important type of information in the 21st century workplace for which I think employers would be willing to pay, and we've already had some interest from employers about that.
Will the institutions who are part of Coursera also monetize their content in some way?
So when we bring in revenue, the university gets part of it. We share the revenue back with the institution specifically to support content production.
So let me end with one last question. Okay. What's next for Coursera? And when I say next, let's look next 5 years, 10 years.
So I think that in 5 years, we will be able to offer most of the curriculum in most disciplines. We're now, 8 months after starting off at 200 courses. A typical institution, even a large one like Penn, has something like 3,000 courses. I think in 5 years we'll have 3,000 courses, so that if you want to be educated as a mechanical engineer or as a business person or as a lawyer, you will be able to get access to some of the world's best courses and gain an education along those lines. I also think that in 5 to 10 years, from the perspective of the higher education ecosystem, people will look back on 20th century and say that I can't believe that we spent so much of our students' time shoveling them into auditoria and having them sit there for 75 minutes while somebody lectured at them, when we all so clearly recognize, and even recognize today, that that's not the best form for getting people to really learn the material and use it effectively. And so I think that our notion of what makes for a good education will shift drastically. I hope in 5, but maybe it'll take 10 years.
The old model has been good for teaching, but perhaps not so good for learning. So
I would say that the old model has been good for scaling, because up until now it was the only way that we had as a society to really convey that material to the larger number of students who came in through our institutional doors. But I don't think it's the right way to teach, and what we would hope to be able to see is that by placing the content in a way that can be assimilated easily by students in an online format, we can go back to teaching the way it should have been.
Okay. Well, good luck to you, and thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you.